let's get started. Ambassador Ahmed, are you there?
I am here.
Okay. Welcome. Why don't you go first? Can you talk about what Barbados is doing?
Absolutely. So I think given the context of what we're talking about, it might be wise to give a backdrop on Barbados and its agenda. And typically, you know, like most governments, they're exploring ways to how they can enhance the lives for their people and create a more advanced governance system around them. And technology plays a fundamental role in that. So when we think about things like augmented or virtual reality, we have to think in the context of how would this create better efficiencies for our nation, how would it increase and better the lives of citizens, how would it add to more of a sustainable governance solution. And it all boils down to selecting the right technologies and also the right implementations of such technologies. And one of the things that Barbados is currently embarking on is establishing an embassy in the metaverse. The embassy in the metaverse is an idea that represents a token of a real embassy in the physical world, but with a level of e-consular services with an effort to provide a more technological approach to how diplomacy is currently being done. So that's one of the major things that are currently happening on the island as we speak. The embassy, the metaverse embassy or the meta embassy is currently in its late stage of designs and specification requirements. And through this, one of the main agenda items that can be achieved by heading down this road is by implementing what we consider to be diplomatic parity. The ability for a government, such as a small island developing state like Barbados, to utilize this technology to enhance the type of diplomacy that they conduct. And in doing that, provide a level of technology-based diplomacy and utilizing the metaverse embassy's content specifications. You can also get into a form of cultural diplomacy. So in essence, Barbados is starting to look at the metaverse from how it can provide a more immersive experience digitally around what Barbados is, how it operates, and how it can go about creating more allyships around the world. Thank you.
Wow, that was fast. Thank you. Okay. Next we have Anne Roy, Senior Advisor at the Indian National Institute. Hello?
Good evening. My name is Anna Roy and I'm Senior Advisor in Niti Aayog. Niti Aayog is the premier think tank of the Government of India, and I head the vertical which works on data and frontier technology. Today's topic is one of the areas where the government is focused on, and the budget, we have an annual budget which is presented by our Union Finance Minister, and in this year's budget there is a mention of emerging technology, sunrise sectors as well as ABTC. So with that background, I would just like to touch upon a few things. First of all, the government is a great, the present government feels that its role is more of an enabler, a catalyst, and emerging technology of IR 4.0, the bouquet of technology, really presents a lot of options to overcome age-old problems of access and other resource barriers that the country faces. So when we talk about XR, basically the approach is how can this technology be used in sectors like education, health, for providing better services, better governance, and how can we kind of address various other issues utilizing this technology. The second important thing which the government is focused on is to ensure that it is responsibly used. The technology is responsibly used after maintaining all the various privacy and other concerns. So that is the second area which we are focusing on. The third area is basically developing a R&D framework, structure, an institutional structure, where presently India is, it can be called as hub of for developing services. And it is considered as the back office for developing various services. We want to now get into the product development space. So how can we address that issue and put in institutional frameworks which will help in promoting the R&D infrastructure in the country. So in my opening remarks, I just thought I will touch upon some of the focus areas of the government. And presently, I'm leading a team which is looking at XR, its implications, what are the challenges, what are the various avenues. And in a month or so, we would be coming out with this report, which is focused around the India story in the global space. And I look forward to the interaction today, and I look forward to interacting with the panelists also after this event, so that we can have possible areas of collaboration could be explored, and we also can discuss about various knowledge sharing and other issues. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Mr. Kim. South Korea, welcome.
Hello. Can I use the presentation?
Please.
Okay.
We'll have it up in this, unless you're bringing it up.
Oh. Hi everyone. This is Min Kim from National IT Industry Promotion Agency in South Korea. Okay, can you see?
Yes.
Okay. Today, I'm gonna introduce several Excel use case in Korea quickly. These 3 use case is for industries and services. The content is first, Korean government strategy on Excel and Metaverse. The second, Excel use case on expressway construction. The third is medic training. And fourth is manufacturing facilities. Then finally is the Korean's next step on Metaverse. Korean government announced the 3 strategies leading to 3 years. In 2019 is strategy on realistic content industry. It is the basic approach to apply XR to industries. And 2020 is a strategy on virtual convergence economy. It is the approach on industry and economy with the XR. And the strategy on metaverse in these years, this is a strategy try to explain what metaverse is and how we can use it. By strategy on virtual convergence economy, Korea discovered several use cases and started to make it. This is expressway use case. The first establish the left side, the first establish the virtual space information for road construction by geographic information and road design, bridge and tunnel design. The second, applying XR technology to make a decision and simulate driving.
Excuse me, Mr. Kim, I'm so sorry to be rude, but you're not moving your slides. You're only on your first slide, and do you want to share your slides?
Oh, okay.
Thank you. Sorry to interrupt.
Is it okay?
I think that you need to enter presenter mode on the PowerPoint itself.
The voice of Kyle from Alaska. Thank you, Kyle.
How can you use it? Can you help me?
Adam, can
I
you
think,
share slides?
I think from your PowerPoint, you'll need to enter the presenter mode version. So start the slideshow.
Oh, I will, okay. Oh, okay.
Thank you. There you go.
Okay.
Yes, now we can see them.
Okay, thank you. Okay, by this Excel transformation, we can prevent design change so that will reduce construction cost. Please check this video. And next, this is a medic training use case. The Widal MR headset and real doll, medic can learn emergency medical treatment. Medic can be a trained realistic situation and became expert. So you can see the real doll and the medic can training with the real situation. Just to check this video. This is not a virtual reality, it's a MR. And third is the manufacturing facility use case. It can increase production efficiency by digital twin virtual factory and virtual factory manufacturing execution system and local control. It makes cost less and produce quickly. Check this video. Okay. In strategy on metaverse in this year, Korean government showed 10 examples of metaverse, the life by middle world, tourism and art and culture like a performance, education, medical service, media and creation, manufacturing, office and public services. I hope I have a chance to present the result of Korean metaverse next year. Thank you.
Thank you so much. We really appreciate it. Okay, next is Jimmy Weinstein from the World Bank.
All right, thank you all for inviting me here. So I'll just do a brief 5-minute intro and really looking forward to questions, and I'll put some links in the chat as well, and hopefully that will entice you. So World Bank has been essentially developing XR, AR, VR tools for the last, I would say, 8 years, since 2014, playing with augmented reality, initially to support all kinds of projects inside the organization. That could be for communication purposes, for operation purposes. We've been playing with 360 cameras, like this GoPro here, for example, sending cameras into the field. The World Bank is all about poverty reduction and sustainable development. So it's all about supporting these projects that are out there that are for helping countries overcome poverty and supporting the growth and sustainability. And by being able to see things in 360 and then VR allowed us to actually create, for example, simulations on how urban development can help certain cities evolve and leapfrog. And over time, we started doing other things, which is more on the communication end. When you're talking about poverty, you want to do a lot of initiatives to bring awareness to issues of how people are living in these conditions and what each person can do to help in these situations, or how can governments basically use their funds and efforts towards improving these initiatives. And World Bank is very much involved in the consulting and funding of some of this. And on the learning side, we also done a lot of different initiatives on the XR space, for especially on the diversity and inclusion training internally for staff, and then supporting different projects around the world where you can use VR, XR, and metaverse in general for learning. One of them is actually Korean funded, a trust fund by Korea, where the World Bank is using to create virtual labs in different countries, one of them being Ecuador, which we opened a very impressive VR lab in the country for teaching industrial risks. So in this case, you want to avoid the students to be exposed to real situations of risk, and doing it in VR makes a ton of sense. But from the World Bank perspective, you can actually launch these projects and avoid having to invest, right, in equipment for students to actually interact with machinery, or big warehouses where you can actually avoid the investment. And this is done in schools that are not in the capital of the country, but in more remote areas and areas that are more limited in terms of access to funding and to the geographical challenges that those bring. And we've done other things now. We just actually launched a few months back a metaverse initiative supporting technical institutes in the Caribbean. And the idea was to open up a virtual campus that the students can enter, the schools can actually kind of their feet in the experiences and start using virtual campuses for teaching, for events, for job fairs, you name it. So we opened that up for proposals and actually did a few examples already, and they were very successful. And it was fun to see people that never had access to these metaverses. We have a virtual campus that we use actually with Verbella that we have at the bank that we were using for our own initiatives, for events at the bank, and doing things that, especially with COVID, avoiding having to be physically in the buildings. But now we start using the same technology to bring countries to and allow them to use it. So it's actually a lot of fun. but also brings a ton of questions and things that you never even thought about. Like, for example, we launched one when we, for this campus, you enter with your computer, so it's very basic. And then we realized that the students and teachers in that school didn't have actually microphones and speakers on their computers, right? So you don't think about that stuff. And when we see all the conversations that happened in the last 2 days, we're really thinking so far advanced that we're also leaving behind a ton of people. And as we advance and get headsets and get thinking about high-speed internet and everything else that is so basic, a lot of people don't think that some countries are really low bandwidth, and then they don't have access to buy headsets, let alone the conversation is really more about smartphones, right? How much is a smartphone, and how can people have access to internet and technology? With VR, it's much farther, right? Meta has been subventing the cost of the Quest, the real headsets that you can use for deploying in larger scale are more than $1,000. How can people actually afford that? And so a lot of people are not thinking about that. The World Bank is trying to bring that into the conversation on what is called a big digital divide, and how that gap in between the people that have access to technology and the people that doesn't have. And if the metaverse is the next stage in the evolution of the internet, then what would that mean for the people that are already living in poverty and that are lacking sustainable development? I was in conversations also on the great things that are being done on 3D streaming. So currently you have to get a headset, get an application, or even on computers. Now the great thing that it's going to happen next for sure is that we're going to be seeing all these applications being streamed, and the 3D quality is going to be almost the same as if you had an application on your device. But what would happen to these countries that don't have access? And these people, the kid that want to get a headset, then now he has to actually have a ginormous connection just to get streamed, which is a big solution, but that also widens the gap for digital development. So that's just to let you know a little bit of what we're thinking. And then the last thing is, which is very interesting, it's all about, so that's the negative, let's say, imagine the negative of evolution, right? But the good thing is that on metaverse conversations, we're also hearing more and more about the new skills, the new jobs that would create. So now we're hearing people that their jobs are to host virtual events. You know, before 2020, you didn't hear too much of that. Or people that are actually designers creating avatars that are super incredible. And other tasks that as we create these new cities in where metaverse is king, where NFTs are the currency and crypto, then that brings all kinds of specialists that I'm sure that our older generations won't have access, and these new generations will. And for that, you may not have to be living in developing countries to understand them. So that will create a great amount of things that will help us leapfrog technology and maybe help through the sustainable development. So there you go, off to you.
Thank you so much. We have one more speaker, Rehana.
Good afternoon, Susan. Actually, I have some slides. I was just wondering if Adam could share them with for me. If not, then I'll be happy to do it.
Give me 1 second.
Yeah, sure. In the meantime, maybe I can start simply by just saying a few words about my organization. So first of all, I'm connecting from Luxembourg, where it is 5 p.m. local time. So good morning, good afternoon, good evening to all of you. As Susan said, my name is Rehana Schwinninger-Ladak, and I work for the European Commission, which is the executive body of the European Union. And we're in charge of developing and implementing policies in a number of very different areas. And in my case, my Directorate General, which is one of the big entities at EU level, at Commission level. So we're responsible for policies in relation to telecoms, digital technologies, all of them, AI, data, XR, HPC, but also in relation to digital content. So we also deal a lot with the platforms. And our policies encompass what we call hard law, regulation, soft law, such as policy recommendations or code of conduct, which are more or less binding. And of course, there's a big part that we do, which is about investment in research and innovation, deployment, and mainstreaming the use of technologies. So I'm going to speak today about XR, which was an initial request, Susan. We have a strategy for XR. which will be an important basis for the conversation we're starting to have on the metaverse. So it could be the metaverse or metaverses, as we have seen from our previous speakers. But in general, our approach is that digital technologies bring a lot of benefit that we have just seen, be it in terms of cost efficiency, reducing costs, gaining in efficiency, limiting risk exposure. So we have a lot of benefit for different sectors, industry and societal, and we need to make sure that we can make them trustworthy to ensure wide and safe take-up. So this is also going to be our initial position for the metaverse, to see, let's see all the different possibilities that the metaverse offers, such as we have seen. And then let's get a bit more insights, about what it means in terms of what it can do, what are the limits, and then we'll see from there how to really to go about it, what kind of really more structured strategy we're going to have also in terms of regulation. But right now, it's more kind of innovation, exploration approach. So I'm going to talk today about the activities that we have for XR and how do we approach it. And I was just wondering, Adam, are you having technical okay, fine. So what I'll do is I'll share my, just bear with me a little second, and if not, I'll be, I had already put it in the right mode. So can you see this? Susan, can you see the slides?
Yes, we can.
All right, so. Okay, fine. So very quickly, where do we stand today in the EU? So what we see is that we've moved from hype, from the forerunners like the game industry to actually reality. We have a lot of industries that are starting to think about adopting XR. And also the fact that we were in confinement for so long, for 2 years or almost, and we have also all these pressing concerns about doing something about climate change. So this can also help us reduce our footprint. And we also see the value it creates across multiple sectors. The numbers that we see in terms of what it can bring to the economy are quite staggering, and also in terms of job creation, in terms of employment. And then obviously when we speak about XR, you have the whole data aspect, which is there because XR generates a lot of data, and we are in data-driven economies. So there are huge stakes in terms of what we are going to do with the data, where is the data, and what kind of reuse we can do. At the same time, in parallel, we see that technology is overall maturing in terms of devices. We still have a long way to go to make them more easily, adapted to the user's needs, especially if you want children to be able to use them. We do have much more better infrastructures. In Europe, we see 5G coming now, much more reliable, faster networks. And obviously, we're also working on a number of capturing technologies, capturing and authoring tools, which allow to do more precise rendering. So we see a lot of applications that are which are coming up and that engage users, be it to work together, to access entertainment, in the medical sector, in a number of sectors. So what is our approach? What is the user approach? It is that we see the value of XR to create this what we call zero distance. So wherever you are, in an urban, rural areas, in small towns, big towns, it does not matter where you are. The XR technologies will allow societal and industrial interaction in a seamless manner for a number of activities. And what is also important for us is that the data that it generates has to be in Europe. As we know, the battle is about data, what we can do with it, and how it is being reused. So data is also at the heart of XR. And what matters to us, and Jimmy spoke about that, it's the applications and the services that we are going to be developing. They have to meet European values such as inclusion, such as respect of privacy, such as non-discrimination, such as how do we bridge the digital divide? And digital divide can be across socioeconomic classes, but also between rural and urban areas. So that is something which is really at the heart of the discussions and our investments. So by 2030, our vision is that we have XR taken up in all areas, be it to be able to access cultural heritage. For instance, imagine if we have all this, underwater heritage, which is in the Mediterranean. So we can go and visit them through XR, but we can also have much better tools to allow us to collaborate. Zoom is a bit limited. It's good. Now it's helped us a lot during the pandemic, but it's not good enough. So how can we have more better immersive collaboration tools? How can we use it in other domains such as health, for teleconsultation, telemedicine, for surgery, but also in a number of other domains such as construction, for manufacturing. And of course, education, where we know that the current traditional teaching methods have really, they've reached a limit. So how can we make education more engaging? How can we really can we bring deeper experience to students in their learning? And these are the challenges that we are working on because we know they are there, obviously in terms of hardware, which is the glasses still remain very expensive. And if you speak about making them available for a large number of people, especially in schools, how do we make sure that they are affordable, at the same time they are safe and they are economic enough? We also need to tackle the bandwidth. So the investments we've made in connectivity, they have hugely increased, but still we need to make sure that every part of the EU is connected with high-speed connectivity. We have to work on standards because that's going to be a big issue. If we want to have a wider use of XR, then we need to make sure that we have interoperability, which comes in. At the same time, XR relies heavily on content, and content which is appealing, which is creative, which is innovative, which means that how do we tackle the copyright aspect? So how do we, what is the value for creators to make this new content? And at the same time, how do we adapt our frameworks for copyright? Another point we need to work on, which I suppose is also an issue for a lot of people, a lot of countries, which is the lack of digital skills. So we see that we will have a problem with having enough specialists in the EU who are able to develop all these new technologies. And I'll go quickly because my time is up. It's also about how do we make XR more accepted socially. There is still a big a gap in awareness and in acceptance of what these technologies can do. So there's still a lot of reluctance and really prudence about this technology. So really work on that. So how are we tackling, how are we going about it? So 4 standards for work. We are funding R&D for the whole value chain in terms of hardware, because we know we have to build the capacity in Europe to have hardware made in Europe. We are also funding XR technologies. We know that still a lot of research aspects when it comes to augmented reality. Virtual reality is already quite good, but in terms of augmented reality, we need to make a lot of progress. We need also to boost the use cases for a wide number of industry, and the speakers before me mentioned all the opportunities we have there. And we're also creating different labs. So one of them, which we're launching, will be for the media sector, which is very important for Europe. At the same time, so funding R&D, we also are funding content creation, because that is important. It is also very important for metaverse to really have this very realistic and innovative environments. Community building is important for us, because we need to bring together all the different parts of the value chain, be it the hardware producers, the technology developers, the technology integrators, the content creators, and the user industries, and build an ecosystem. So it's really much an ecosystem approach in the EU. And the last thing is really this longitudinal studies. So we know that with these technologies, we do have issues in relation to ethics, to security, to safety, interoperability. So how do we have a better insight about what is the impact, what are the challenges that come with such XR, with these technologies? So this is what I wanted to say in a nutshell about how the EU are approaching XR. And this is going to be the basis also of how we're going to go for the metaverse. Voilà, Susan, so back to you.
Thank you so much. Before we move to the audience questions, we booked this panel on the premise that we wanted to talk about governments, what governments were doing, not just to advance XR within their countries, but to use XR to serve their citizens. Beyond Ambassador Abed, who gave the example of the embassy in the metaverse, does anyone want to add anything? Rehana, do you want to add anything about how,
Sorry, Susan, I didn't hear you very well because my connection had an issue.
I apologize. Do you have any case examples you might cite as to how the Commission or member states are using XR to serve their citizens? Government and
I was muted. So we do have we have some countries that are really forerunners. So we have countries such as Finland, such as Germany, such as France, where we have use cases in specific domains. And right now, it can be in the medical sector, for instance, for the telemedicine, for training surgeons. Also, Finland is very much advanced for education, so they're going to invest a lot also in more immersive content for learning and teaching. So we have a number of different kind of use cases in domains such as health, such as education, such as culture and cultural heritage, such as media, such as publishing, to really improve and widen access for citizens to content, to more content. Yeah.
Would anyone else like to comment? Okie dokie. I will open it up to questions from the audience. Stephanie?
Sure. Is there
apologies, thanks for your patience.
Yeah, so I have a question for Rehana. I'm sorry, if you don't mind, I wanted to ask, so the EU has been doing a lot of sort of massive regulation of new technologies with the DSA, DMA, AI Act. Do you foresee something like that in the near future, in the distant future, related to XR? Do you think it's going to more rely on what already exists?
So it's interesting to see your views that we are massively regulating. That's not our view. No, what is very important for us, it's the timing of when we regulate. So the approach that we have is that we should regulate when regulation is necessary. We do not regulate upfront because we don't want to stifle innovation. We don't regulate. I've disappeared from the screen, but I'm still there. Yeah, I can see myself. We should not regulate too late when the damage has been done. So for us, it's very important to see the uptick of a technology and to make sure that we are very well aware of the risk and challenges that we need to tackle through regulation. So right now, we consider that the GDPR, the Data Act, and the DSA, so the Digital Services Act and the Digital Markets Act, are sufficient to regulate XR technologies. And when the AI Act will come into force, that should also provide more, how to say, legal, more clarity on what is forbidden, what is high risk, and what is lower risk. So right now we are not into a regulation approach towards XR. It's more about promoting use cases and seeing how these technologies are going to develop. And don't forget, the AI Act comes like 20, 30 years after AI is being used. So it took all that time to regulate.
Any other comments from any other panelists? Okay, yes, sir.
Yes, I have a question that kind of relates more to a cross-cultural and technological and psychological analysis. I have a question that relates to kind of a cross-cultural and technological and psychological analysis across different cultures, different nationalities. Is there any studies or comments that you can present from your own situation on kind of information density that is acceptable in different cultures? It gets kind of to the information overload or information fatigue for very immersive technologies. Some cultures not readily adapt to very intensive immersive technologies just because whatever reason, as such. Has there been analysis, say, between Korea and European countries and the United States in that matter?
Everyone on the panel want to comment? Jimmy?
Yeah, I mean, a very interesting topic, I would think. I haven't come across information overload, I would think. To me, it's more like lack of information is the issue and lack of access to information. But I'm sure that we're gonna get to that once these technologies evolve, and then we are gonna be bombarded by all kinds of commercial aspects to it. And how do we regulate what we want to see in the spaces? But the behavioral science of it is very important, and that's something that we have looked into. Like, for example, we done studies in Southeast Asia where you can actually wear a headset and see how, for example, an urban development or a park will change, and then how do you feel about it? And then they will survey with it. And in our cases, we also think about, I mean, you're talking about some cultures, we're also looking at the illiteracy as well, right? And then with VR, you can actually learn without having to read, or you can have somebody explain it to you and feel that it's in front of you, or we can interact in the metaverse with your avatar and then kind of overlap some of that. So sorry that doesn't answer your question, but it's I would love to hear more. So if you do come across some of that, we'd love to hear.
Okay, we've got some online questions. I will turn back to everyone here. But here is a question from the dean of another university focusing on international affairs, and it's a great question. Could Ambassador Abed speak more about the potential of VR to alter the conduct of diplomacy?
Sure, and I think that's a very interesting question, because when we think about diplomacy, there's a lot of protocols that need to be observed, and they're usually very traditional protocols that are customary amongst the diplomatic spheres and interactions. But when we think about virtual reality, one can start thinking about the types of gestures and movements, eye contact, these various types of senses that would be somewhat lost with a digital avatar. I might have an avatar that's always wearing a suit and a tie, but the reality is I might be at home in the typical pajamas, but still able to conduct a certain level of professional diplomacy from that type of standard. As it relates to altering traditional diplomacy, I see this playing some level of impact on the digital scale of it. And what I mean by that is, what happens when an ambassador and his constituent or a citizen from his nation enter into a private discussion in an immersive environment? How do the norms particularly change around that? But for the most part, because, and I think, Jimmy, you just said this is a fairly new field. So many things that we're talking about today have yet to come to pass. The standards that we need to see introduced, the types of policies and procedures, from how to protect youth and other potential audiences online, how to look at the cybersecurity principles and other types of areas. And the reality of it is we will get closer to understanding with more testing, more deployment, more venturing into this new field. Look, the metaverse is quite old, even to the point of its coining of a term. But what's changed in the last few years is particularly the computing power, the types of products on the market, such as the Oculus Rift. And these things are propelling the industry forward in such a way that it's causing various industries, persons, and other audience members to start looking at this field a lot more closely. And what you would often find is that there are a level of immaturity around how things have been implemented and how they're currently being implemented. So to get back on point, there's no direct answer for how this will alter diplomacy, but we will definitely be one of the first nations in the world to discover that. And that might end up setting some new standard or some new methodology in how to approach this new environment with traditional norms. I hope that answers your question.
Well, yesterday, we had a discussion, Dan Ackerson talked about this class at Stanford where the interactions were all virtual. And he showed how people didn't know how to react initially, although they eventually came around. So there may be some stumbling blocks there, but you perceive that like AI, I was part of an experiment that looked at AI and trade negotiations. And you know, the idea was that AI would yield the compromises faster. What's your sense on that?
What's my sense on AI as it relates to interactions and the diplomatic alteration?
Could XR lead to more compromises diplomatically?
Yes, it can. I mean, for example, if I am representing a nation as a dignitary, or let's call it an ambassador, in a virtual immersive space, then in theory, some level of AI could replicate my avatar's movements and interactions with persons on the other end of the communication spectrum. So there is definitely a possibility for some level of deception to take place with AI. But at the same time, when we think about blockchain technology, which is another component or another layer of the utility of technology, I could almost utilize an avatar that is key signed by me. In the same way we use PGP to sign emails, I can sign that this is my interaction and that this is truly my avatar and my person interacting with someone online. From that perspective, we can counter those types of risks. But the other side of it is, when you think about someone entering a building, in this case, a virtual one, I have been in discussions with potential parties of interest in our metaverse embassy that we're looking at AI from the perspective of what happens when somebody walks into the embassy. How do we interface with that person? Is it always going to be a live human being being paged to then go and join the metaverse with their headset? Or is it some level of AI with a set number of interactions that are possible prior to a live human stepping in? So again, I would think it's the safest answer to say right now that while there are probably some studies or gesture formats that have been recorded on how human interactions occur and how that applies to the world of the diplomatic sphere, I would say we're still in extremely early days of having those types of things fully thought out and implemented in a way that we mitigate as much risk, if not all the risk that could be presented when AI and diplomacy collide in a XR format.
Thank you so much for that answer. Anyone else on the panel like to speak? Okay. Bertrand,
Yes. This is a question for Rehana. I think the panorama that you presented is wonderful. I just have a question about the reiteration, the constant reiteration by the European Commission of the notion that European data should be stored in Europe, because it is such an incentive to data localization all around the world. Why not have the aim of establishing a certain number of rules with other countries to create a safer space that is broader than just saying things should be in our place? I know that there's Shrem 2, there will be Shrem 3. There are so many problems, I agree. But this constant reiteration of the mantra, like jumping on the chair and saying, European data needs to be stored in Europe, is something that I find really dangerous in terms of the international landscape.
Well, I can understand your comment.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, thank you, Bertrand. I suppose you're French or Belgian, or either by your first name or your accent. Data is important. What is the logic, I think, behind saying that we want to make sure that that data we produce stays here? Is that we want to make sure that data, especially if it's personal data, it is under European jurisdiction. I think GDPR has been mentioned. It is very important that when it is personal data, the user is in control of what is going to happen to the data. So it is also about making sure that any kind of development we're going to do is going to be user-centric. That's one thing. Secondly, what is very important for us, it's also in all the data policies we have, it's the reuse aspect. So what we want to make sure is that our industry, especially our SMEs, which constitute 90% of the industrial fabric of the EU, they can have access to such data. And the Data Act, which is now being discussed between the co-legislator, so in the EU, it's between the European Parliament and the member states. So this the Data Act aims at removing all the existing barriers that are still there, so that SMEs can have access to it and they can benefit from the value of the reuse of data.
Ça marche. And I think you're only talking about personal data because you want to be open as possible with public data, right? Okay.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Anyone else want to comment? Because of course we have India's data law and the data dam of Korea. Do you want to say anything about that? Related to XR? Anybody? Mr. Kim? Please.
Okay. I just comment on the XR and 5G. Someone asked to. So 5G can make 5G is enable the mobile edge computing. So mobile edge computing makes the device more light and less less battery. So it can make a more light and more computing power. So XR and 5G can make more realistic contents, and it is the key to XR metaverse world. So I think so. So 5G can make XR to get into the metaverse world.
Okay. Anna, would you like to comment on any of the things we're
just hearing the conversation, many of the things are, we also have the same issue, like data is one. India is one of the most data-rich countries today in the world. And we are presently working on, consent-based data sharing in different forms. because we feel that unless we have sharing governance frameworks in place, it is very difficult to really capitalize on this. Data localization is also very much part of our framework. But we feel by data localization will, like Rehana said something, I would supplement to what the point she made by saying that our industry, our researchers feel through data localization we will be able to develop the domestic R&D and the domestic industry. So that is a important part of the entire narrative. I don't think, in today's world, really, whether you are like one of the things in our national AI strategy, which we had kind of propagated is presenting India as the garage of the world. So you come solve for India, and the same solutions can be applicable in 40% of the rest of the world. So that kind of a strategy which we are following in the emerging technology space, where data is an important element. We have a very detailed the strategy on data and data sharing, data generating. There are several public digital platforms which allows access to data by startups, so that it's not just deep pockets or big techs who have access to the data. We are actively, actually, I personally am involved in developing similar platforms in various sectors. There is a detailed data strategy, and one of the platforms which I have personally kind of developed is enabling last mile usage of published data and then taking it forward to private data and individual data. Well, I can go on and on about data, but moving to the XR place, our strategy is more at seeing how government can leverage these technologies to overcome several challenges that we are facing, especially in sectors which are characterized by public goods. We do not want to crowd out the private sector innovation and the private sector development. So wherever bottom line driven approach can promote the development and adoption of technology, there, in case there are any policy or regulatory challenges which in the XR space, only in the gaming space which we are facing presently, is something which the central government will be seized of. Otherwise, our focus really is on promoting adoption of these technologies in those sectors like education, health, in providing better solutions, say better learning outcomes in education, or better training and classroom training in education and also in health. The last point which I would like to mention is collaboration. We are promoting a collaborative approach so that we do not reinvent the wheel. And there again, we reach out to various constituencies, agencies, to have these arrangements in place. Sorry, the last point which I wanted to mention was actually the responsible use, because especially in XR, the jury is still out. What is the impact on health? What is the impact on, on children? Because when you go from the physical to this very, very immersive kind of a space, and when you talk about, today it is games, tomorrow it could be something, but what happens to your privacy? What happens to child, issues, child rights? So these are very important things which I feel that parallelly needs equal attention along with the development. My personal view is development is always the easier part of it, but adoption, implementation on the ground, especially in a country like India, which is so diverse, there is so much of, digital divide, literacy issues. I think implementation is the key, and the governance model that India has been following for the past couple of decades of public digital platforms is something which we are kind of, pursuing in this space as well. Sorry if I took a bit longer.
No, thank you for your insights. very much. Does anyone else want to comment on this?
Yeah, Susan, what I just wanted to, also wanted to say in relation to our data policies, which is that what we're doing in the EU is that we want to have a single market for data. So really having this data flows within given sectors and across sectors. And to make that happen, we're working right now on what we call data spaces. So I have a number of data spaces that I'm launching in my unit. So we have one on culture. We're going to have one specifically on media and audiovisual industries. We're going to have one on tourism, which is so important. So the idea is, how do we make sure that we have data with all that, that it entails, data quality, standards, reliability, trustworthiness. And then how do we ensure that data flows and the kind of reuse that we can make across sector? And that is also going to be an important part for XR.
We have some more questions, but I just want to summarize where we're at. Because there's a contradiction here. The purpose of the panel was to talk about what governments are doing to utilize XR and to promote XR as a means of growth, right? But now we're talking about data, and the contradiction is that basically that we're a little bit sloppy because we're talking about data as a public good, and we need it to be a public good in order to really reach the potential of XR. We're also talking about it as a proprietary good, because we know that IP rules will have to change, but if we're talking about all these different types of data, it's going to be a ton of data, and it's going to be very hard to control that. And finally, we're talking about, so we're talking about personal data, proprietary data, and public data. And well, we keep saying it's data, but then there's other types of data, right? IoT data, which can also be, so, I think as Bertrand is kind of saying, how can we reach the public good nature of this if we localize it for the commercial rationale? And that's the thing that I think is very confusing to people. Does anyone have a comment on that?
I don't have a comment, but I have a question to you, Susan. How can you dissociate data from the use of XR?
No, you can't. I yesterday on national data strategies and this confusion. That's why I'm pointing it out, actually. So the hub looked at, which governments had a national strategy for data, and what are they talking about when they're talking about data? And generally, they're talking about personal data. But sometimes they're talking about the public good nature of it. I don't want to take too much time on that, but I think until we come to terms with that, we're really not going to be able to deal with the complexities of governing XR.
Susan?
Yeah.
I would love to add something here.
Please. And then we have a question. Two questions.
So thank you very much. XRSI conducted a roundtable on 10th of December on Human Rights Day last year. We published a report called Virtual World's Real Risk. If you look at this report, it highlights a few points about data. We uncovered we really zoomed into, and Christina and I, we were chairing that roundtable. We zoomed into 3 aspects, which is education, medical, and then we did workforce. When it comes to XR, there is a new type of data. Thus far, governments globally have only talked about personal data. In the United States, for the legal purposes, we use a term called personal identifiable information, social, et cetera, et cetera. From our research, what we are up against is inferred data. In the medical context, it really matters because you need that information to diagnose for cancer, for all kinds of things. But in the wrong hands, for certain jurisdictions like the United States, this could mean that somebody would not be given insurance. And with the collection of this type of a data we call it biometrically inferred data, we have continued research for XRSI Privacy Safety Framework 2.0, which we have now coined another term is psychographically inferred data. So these are two new types of data for which policies must be made for XR. And in every different context, like in the medical context, you share the data within the network, don't share it with the insurance provider. It's different. Within the ad context, do not share the data with the third-party provider unless I have given you an informed consent. Even with the informed consent, and I could keep going on, but I highly encourage everyone to go look at that report where we specifically call out, Christina and I make a call to action statement where governments globally need to make a positioning statement where they acknowledge this type of data is going to be used for undermining certain rights. It could be used, it could be weaponized. So we, this is something that, E-Safety Commissioner of Australia used some of our standard do similar positioning statement where they're literally claiming that we will protect children, minorities, risk to elderlies. And so this kind of data at the very minimum baseline must be protected, like for minorities, whether it's a medical context, workplace context, and whether it is, education context for students, because in the United States, we have FERPA, Federal Education Regulation Act. These
I'm
types of,
sorry, we have a bunch of questions.
sure thing.
Really,
Sorry, I don't mean to lecture everybody, but go take a look at that report and
you can link to it.
prepare your policy according to it, xrsi.org. But yeah, I'm gonna do another conference in December, so come to that as well.
Rebecca.
Hello. Oh, okay. What a wonderful panel. It's so exciting to hear people across this international context and conversation. And so what I wanted to ask is, what kind of platform could you envision for continuing these kind of conversations in terms of investigating these issues more deeply together that would be appealing to your different organizations and countries? What would that platform need to look like? And is the media center that Rehana mentioned that's being funded or established in the EU, is it that kind of a platform?
So if I understood your question, so for you, the platform is more about how do we exchange best practices, how do we foster a collaboration across jurisdictions, across countries. If you're referring to the VR lab or data space, I don't know, but the initiatives I mentioned earlier, they aim at bringing together the different data, the different practices of data, and how do you create value out of it by developing new application, new services. They will, of course, obviously engage community at large, the given communities. Now, if we're speaking here about really how, as policymakers, at a global level, how do we have this platform of conversation? I think what Susan is doing today is wonderful. So how do we engage in such conversation through these kind of conferences? Through a sustained dialogue on specific topics. So I really see those different streams. Yeah.
In the next half hour, so I hope you will join us. Does anyone else want to comment on this?
I would say that I'm part of the VR/AR Association as well. So I would actually recommend everybody that wants to be part of the conversation. It's a global organization. They have committees on each area you can imagine, including governance and including XR for good and including all the verticals on industries. And they're constantly outputting papers. There's annual conferences as well. So outside of the academic, let's say, it's where actually all the players in the industry are conveying, at least one of the big ones. So definitely check out the Verara if you can.
Anna, did you have a comment?
Actually, just by way of information, we have all data empowerment. Basically, the framework allows. This is we have already developed it, so it allows consent-based data sharing. So somebody just referred to about data being shared, empowered decision. We are already doing it. And in the financial sector, we are already implementing it as in a regulatory sandbox, and we are in constant dialogue with the EU and various member EU countries on taking this forward, the data framework, basically the consent-based data sharing, just by way of information. Thank you.
Thank you. Any final comments of the panel? Anybody? Okay. I regret we have to go because, okay, why don't you ask your question quickly, because I promised you. Sir?
We've been talking about rapid technological change and the winners. Rapid technological change also means losers. A lot of people will lose their jobs. They don't want to adjust. And in democracies, they vote. And they put political pressure on the politicians. It's not the metaverse, but look what happened with the farmers in India.
What's your question for this?
The question is very simple. What do you do about the losers?
I don't think this is the panel to address this, even though they're government officials, because they were not asked to do that. So why don't we let them go? But that is an excellent question to ask the chairman of HTC, president of HTC. So why don't we, because that is our next speaker again. So forgive me for being pushy broad here, but thank you so much, panelists. And if you can, please stay, because we're gonna have questions and answers over lunch. And so I'm gonna begin with Callie, if he's here.